Good morning. Welcome to our January 2008 walk here at the White Point Preserve. My name is John Nieto. I'll be your naturalist guide today. I am also the Conservancy's Education Program Manager. As we walk along, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We're going to walk in the White Point Preserve here. There's 102 acres of habitat that's been reintroduced here to the what used to be a military site, and as we walk along we'll talk about the history of the area and point out interesting artifacts that still exist here. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We're going to talk about the flowers, the geology, the plants that we introduced again here on this trail. We're going to walk up above to the old bunkers and walk back down around the garden of the grass area and back down to the parking lot here. So it's not going to be a difficult walk, but we're going to make a circuit of the whole property. So you're welcome, and let's get going. This first structure that we come to with the chain link fence around it is one of the missile assembly buildings. The past military history here included the fact that this was a Nike missile site. Nike missiles incorporated around the Los Angeles area created what was called a ring of steel during the Cold War. It was thought prudent to have surface-to-air missiles ready for launch in case the Soviet bombers attacked the West Coast. And this building here was one of the buildings where the missiles were put together. There's a building behind it where the warhead was assembled and placed onto the missiles, and the fuel was loaded into the missiles. As we climb up above the immediate area, we'll look down on the missile launching facility, and I'll point that out to you. What's interesting about this area for its future use is that this will become our nature center, and the area around here will be a demonstration garden. The demonstration garden will detail what type of plants the Native American Indians that lived here, we know them as the Gabrielinos, they call themselves today the Tongva. What Native American uses were for the plants that we'll have in the demonstration garden. We'll also introduce the public to various color schemes that were important to the Native American Indians associated with those plants. Behind us we have a newly planted garden. Most of these plants were planted with the idea that they will show the types of colors that could be available in the wildflower mix of native plants that could be grown even in your garden. So look for this in the next year or so to show us a very nice spring mix of blooming plants, and wildflowers will be spread out throughout the habitat here this spring. So let's get going and continue down the road. The reason we stopped here was to introduce you to a couple of interesting historical facts here. Behind us is we have a grove of palm trees and Brazilian pepper. That area there was an area where early Japanese farmers and fishermen lived here in San Pedro. They lived here and fished the White Point Royal Palms area below the bluffs here. They fished for abalone. They boiled the abalone and dried it in racks and sold it to the Asian market, as well as markets in Little Tokyo and Los Angeles. They built their homes here, right, and leased the property from the Ramon Sepulveda family. And the Ramon Sepulveda family had a summer residence right here behind the olive trees. The Sepulveda family owned much of what we know today as the Palos Verdes Peninsula. They in turn won the the grant, the title to the property from the Dominguez family, who was the original grantee to this property. The Dominguez progenitor was a soldier in the Spanish Army, one of the soldados de cuero, known as the Leather Jacket Scouts, 26 of whom started the expedition that opened up California, North California, or Alta California as it was known. They arrived in San Diego in 1769, led by Pedro Fagas, who became the first governor of Alta California. Upon retirement, Senor Dominguez petitioned the king through the governor to have a grant established in his name and have permission to graze cattle. So he was allowed 75,000 acres that included the area from today's LA River. Back in those days, because the rivers were not channeled in concrete, they meandered quite often. In those days, that was the San Gabriel River. But from today's LA River to the ocean around Redondo Beach to today's Rosecrans Avenue, all that enclosed the property known as the Rancho San Pedro. And this ranch had its headquarters, or its main adobe building, on what's today the Alameda Street area known as Dominguez Hills. They're in fact at the Salesian Seminary on Alameda Street. You can still visit the old adobe. So great history here, and hopefully someday there'll be an archaeological dig here and find all sorts of interesting things. So let's go on. We're stopping here for a moment, one, to catch our breath, and two, to point out across the street we have at Royal Palms the fountain that we see there at the entrance to the parking lot. That fountain used to be installed down below at the Tagami Brothers Resort. Their resort included a 50-room hotel, dance floor, a few slot machines, and most importantly, 5 sulfur hot springs enclosed in pools, 5 pools. That was built in the 1917 era. They had buses that went back and forth to Little Tokyo, and the resort was quite well established up until about 1925, when Ramon Sepulveda decided that another resort should be built next door, and the Royal Palms Family Resort was built. Back in those days, there was a segregation era, so the Japanese tourists and the American tourists didn't mix, so there were 2 separate resorts, unfortunately. Then it happened that in 1927 there was probably a large El Nino storm that came through, and a large wave destroyed several of the foundations for the pools. That in turn followed with the Depression, and then 1933 brought the Long Beach earthquake, which unfortunately the shaking of the earth caused the thermal vents to close, and the pools were not heated anymore. So right after that, then of course the Depression took its toll and the resort closed. The effects of World War II then dragged on through the area, and the Japanese population was then interred, as you know. The property down below was, and the property up above was taken by the Defense Department at the time, the War Department, and demolition crews from the Navy practiced their work down at the resort. So not much is left now, but take a look over the side of the bluff. There are interpretive panels above, and you can see the foundation that's left of the large pool area. Some of the plants around us are of note. We have the mule fat that's growing quite lushly here. Up above we have the larval food for the El Segundo blue butterfly, an endangered species you might have read a little bit about over the summer. Spring and summertime they discovered a great population that that lives now around the Palos Verdes Peninsula, and lately the introduction of the plants around the Esplanade and Redondo Beach and Torrance area have reintroduced the endangered El Segundo blue butterfly back to its old habitat along the South Bay beaches. So that's the coastal dune buckwheat that we have there at the top of the bluff. Below here we have succulents called Dudleya, lance-leaf Dudleya. That's unique to the Channel Islands and the Palos Verdes Peninsula. Again, a very nice plant to have reintroduced to the area. Talk a little bit about the marine terraces. You notice here on our left the stair-step arrangement of the hillside. Each one of those flat areas has a bluff top. As we go higher and higher up the hill, we see that it's more eroded, rounded off. But each one of those represent a beach, an ancient beach. Like we have the cliffs here being eroded away by the wave action. Each one of those stair steps, terraces, represents a beach that was at sea level at one time. This was once a flat seafloor, and around the corner here we'll talk a little bit about the makeup of the sedimentary rock. But first I wanted to point out to you that as this flat seafloor rose up out of the ocean, wave action worked on the island that was produced, and this wave action caused this erosion and this terracing. We're still coming up out of the seafloor at about a rate of 0.4 millimeters a year. So it's still moving up. And all this is due to the effects of various faults. The Palos Verdes Fault, the Cabrillo Fault, various faults out in the mid-channel. The San Andreas Fault is the mother of all faults here in Southern California. So all of these actions caused this to rise up out of the seafloor, and the backstop to what became the LA Basin. And we'll talk a little bit about sedimentary rock as we walk up the trail a little bit more. We stopped here to continue our conversation on the geology of the area. I wanted to point out the sedimentary layers here behind me. You notice that we have white layers and brown layers of rock here. The white layers are called diatomaceous earth, and they're made up of fossil plankton skeletons. They're phytoplankton, so they're plant, algae kinds of things. And they've accumulated here as a function of a lot of the past history of the area. As the plants have died, they've accumulated in the depressions of the area. The brown rock is sedimentary rock, Altamira shale it's called. And again, as this hill rose up out of the water, it created an island, which the nearest shoreline was 35 miles away in the Santa Monica Mountains. And everything between here and the Santa Monica Mountains was open ocean, in some places 6 miles deep. The island created a block to many of the currents that were flowing through the area, and allowed sediment that was coming off the ancient San Gabriel Mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, the Santa Ana Mountains, to accumulate and gather here at the base of the island and stack up, if you will, till it reached the mountains. That dry land that was produced became the LA Basin of today, where some of the sediment, like this, is 6 miles deep.